is Fantasy Football Picks and Bets presented by Prize Picks. Use code MMN when you deposit at prizepicks.com to get a match deposit of up to $100. Meaning, if you deposit $100, you will have $200 to play with on prizepicks.com. Check out the fantasy props, the overs and the unders. Coming up momentarily, Pete Overzet is going to have the DraftKings first look and research for you for the week to get started, to get your plans on the go, to go win some of that money. Plus, I do want to let you know that if you go to runthesims.com/Mayo, you'll get a discount on the DFS Optimizer, the single game showdown simulator, and you can run everything, including your own custom projections, up to 10,000 times to see the distribution of floor and ceiling and where those median projections are going to be. I highly recommend it. runthesims.com/Mayo. Enough of me. Let's get to Pete.
All right, welcome back to another edition of our first look at the following week's salaries for the Week 11 DraftKings slate. I'm Peter Overzet here on the Mayo Media Network, and we are going to do what we do every Monday afternoon, and that is move on from the week behind us and look ahead at these salaries. And I will say, I am pretty excited about this slate. We only have two teams on bye. It's the Broncos and Rams. So we don't have, our Cooper Kupps and our Darrell Hendersons, but this is shaping up to be a pretty good main slate. We only have 3 late games in the 4 p.m. slate, but all of them look really good, including the main event, the marquee matchup. It's Dallas, Kansas City. That opened up with a 55.5 point over under. So clearly has massive shootout appeal. We also have Arizona, Seattle. Maybe we get Kyler Murray back. We get another game under Russ's belt after returning from injury. That has a 50-point over-under. And then we have Cincinnati, Las Vegas as well with a 49-point over-under. Both those teams have had a propensity for throwing the ball, playing a little bit more up-tempo of late. So that game could be fun. And then the other notable matchup in the 1 p.m. slate looks like Indiana-Buffalo. I think that could be a pretty fun kind of sneaky shootout game. It has a 49-point over-under. Let's go ahead here and pull up our DraftKings here for salaries, and we can start going through what we are seeing here at the various positions. So as always, we'll start here at quarterback. And I should mention the usual caveat, which is I'm recording this on Monday. Lots changes as far as injuries, as far as projections. So be adaptable throughout the week. This is meant to kind of give you the framework for your DFS research leading up to the weekend. And I'll say right now, we have Mahomes and Dak Prescott, who I think are going to be incredibly popular. They are in that marquee matchup I just described, and they're only 7,600 and 7,200. So these guys are going to project very well. They are going to be very popular options. And that's why I think some of the guys at the high end, specifically Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, might be a little bit sneaky this week in that, people might not want to pay up to be contrarian when you have, Patrick Mahomes and Dak Prescott here for much cheaper. In the case of Dak Prescott compared to Josh Allen, that's $900 in savings, and they'll probably project to a similar ceiling. So that'll be an interesting dynamic to see how that plays out on the slate. Like I said, too, a couple quarterbacks that look kind of rusty in their return, Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson, they're now back and look, appropriately priced here. Russell Wilson only at 6,500 at home versus Arizona. That seems like it could be a get-right spot for him. And then Aaron Rodgers versus Minnesota, who's been giving up lots of points at 7,000. We have that matchup I talked about with the Bengals and the Raiders. Derek Carr, 5,900. Joe Burrow, 6,600. Joe Burrow's a little pricey, I would say, but that's probably going to keep his ownership in check a decent amount as well. So much different from last week where there was really only kind of 4 quarterbacks who stood out plus Jalen Hurts. This week seems we have a lot of options here in the mid and upper tier. Of course, Jalen Hurts is well at 6,800. I feel like his price is just always fixed right here in this 6,500 to 7,000 range. He had another nice day on the ground, 53 yards rushing. The only thing kind of capping his ceiling right now is how much they are running the ball with the running back. So, the pass attempts have been pretty low lately, although they picked up in this game against Denver. He threw those 2 touchdown passes to DeVonta Smith. So I think Jalen Hurts is always in play in the conversation. And I think the concern with him is just New Orleans has been playing a bunch of these super slow kind of slogfest type games. If we're kind of looking for some cheap QBs, it's a little hard. There's not a lot I'm liking down here. I do think Carson Wentz will be in the conversation at 5,500. Should be some garbage time points for them. They've been playing really well, which has allowed them to rush the ball a ton. Obviously, Jonathan Taylor having some really good games lately. But if we get his pass attempts, up here toward 50, like we saw in that game against Tennessee, then we're going to start to be in the conversation here at 5,500. We'll have to see with some of these other kind of situations here. Who knows? Maybe Trey Lance, after Jimmy Garoppolo's performance tonight, maybe he potentially is in the mix. That would be super fun versus Jacksonville at 5,400. So you have to keep an eye on that. Justin Fields playing a lot better of late. He is at home here against Baltimore. That's going to be kind of a tough matchup for him, but I do think he'll be in the GPP conversation. Probably not a cash game consideration, but he will be in play there for tournaments at 5,700. Let's head over to the running back position. Last week was an absolute loaded week at running back. I mean, not only did we have the cheap guys like Mark Ingram and Ramondre Stevenson, and also, Dearness Johnson, we also just had loaded guys at the top end. Again, looks pretty similar again this week. We have Christian McCaffrey, who was so close to a big game last week. He had a couple times where he stepped out of bounds on what should have been touchdowns. He misses the rushing yard bonus by 5 yards. I mean, just really close to like a 45-point week. He looks back. He is still losing a little bit of work to Chuba Hubbard, who was getting some touches. But again, with Christian McCaffrey, the 10 targets, that's really where we're making our hay there. Jonathan Taylor, probably the best rusher in the NFL right now, just playing incredibly well. He will obviously be in the conversation at 8,300, although I wonder if people will get a little scared off in this matchup because Jonathan Taylor has in the past been a little prone to being game scripted out. This could shape up to be a little bit more of a Nyheim Hines game. That said, Taylor's just running so well that you have to think that they give him kind of the Titans Derrick Henry treatment this year, where they were just using him in all game scripts, regardless of how things were going. We might get some guys back. Alvin Kamara, of course, missed this week. Nick Chubb missed this week. We should see those guys return, which would definitely make things interesting. DeAndre Swift continues to be rock solid. He was losing a little bit of work to Jamar Jefferson, but Jamar Jefferson got hurt. Jamal Williams wasn't active. And these 33 rush attempts, granted, it was boosted a little bit there in overtime, but the workload has still been really nice for DeAndre Swift, and he's always going to catch a few balls a game as well. One big injury situation we're going to keep tabs on is Aaron Jones. It does look like he'll for sure miss this week. He has that MCL sprain, and he's expected to miss 1 to 2 weeks. So that means A.J. Dillon here at 6,200 is going to project extremely well in this matchup. He's played really good in basically a bunch of different game environments. He had 21 carries for 66 yards and 2 TDs, pitched in a couple of receptions there. So A.J. Dillon is going to be kind of this week's James Conner, I would say, the guy who was in kind of a committee, and then that committee clears out for him and he's leading the backfield, and he's priced just enough to where I don't think he'll be like a 65% owned guy in small field in the way Dearness Johnson was, but he is going to be incredibly popular. But we do have enough kind of cheap options even below him that I don't think it'll be absolutely absurd, his ownership. So kudos to DraftKings on nailing the pricing on that. Antonio Gibson, I was really worried about him before their bye week. He was losing work to Jarrett Patterson. The shin injury had really been nagging him. And I think I was pretty impressed with what I saw coming out of the bye. He had the 2 touchdowns, 24 attempts in a game against Tampa, who have been a pretty stout rush defense, getting a couple targets as well, which hasn't necessarily been his specialty this year. So Antonio Gibson definitely going to be in the conversation against Carolina here at 5,900. Eli Mitchell has been running really well. I'll be curious to see how he looks tonight. If he has another night tonight where he really controls that backfield. I think he could be fairly popular. And the thing that was great about him last week was seeing him get these 5 targets, because the 2 games previous to that in week 7 and 8, he wasn't catching any balls. And so, then you're worried a little bit about his floor. But I'll be curious to see if he's catching balls tonight and leading the backfield. He'll be in play down there. We'll have to see, like I said, what's the deal with Nick Chubb. I assume Nick Chubb will be back, and so Dearness Johnson won't be in play anymore. David Montgomery's price really sticks out here at 5,500. He returned in week 9 to 13 carries, 2 receptions, and I think pretty safe to assume that his workload would continue to increase. Matt Nagy has been on the record that Montgomery would see a full complement of snaps once he was back in the lineup. Mostly held true to his word there in week 9. Obviously, Khalil Herbert playing really well, so you can't just, jettison him off to the bench. But David Montgomery, I would imagine his workload to increase a little bit this week. We might also get CEH back this week. However, if we don't, man, Darrell Williams, he had 9 catches last night for 101 yards, including that touchdown where he basically mossed the defender in the end zone. So Darrell Williams playing really well. And that game is just so attractive, from a shootout potential, that Darrell Williams is going to be very much in play at 5,400. And we'll see down here. I'm trying to see if there's anything else in the dumpster dive territory that might be interesting. I should toss out D'Onta Foreman. He led the Titans in carries this week, which is fairly interesting, because I think conventional wisdom is that Adrian Peterson would be the lead back there, but he had 11 attempts on 30 yards, also caught a couple passes. So yeah, against the Texans, who have obviously given up massive, days on the ground to running backs, I think Foreman at 4,900 will be in play. And I think you can mention Adrian Peterson as well. So those are your kind of cheap running backs there. Not seeing anything else jumping out too much, but who knows? As the week goes on, this stuff is prone to change. At wide receiver this week, TYREEK Hill continues to be really consistent. He didn't have a big yardage game last night, only 83 yards, but he did have those 2 TDs and continues to just be a big focal point of the offense. So he'll be a very popular option. Maybe Davante Adams is a little bit in check, because he didn't have a monster game. He was chalk last week at 7,900. His price goes up 500 and doesn't do much in that first game. So I wonder if Adams will be a little sneakier, maybe kind of like Diggs was this week. But Adams, obviously a good play. Jefferson, he's really starting to get pricey up here at 8,100, but Jefferson is clearly one of the elite wide receivers who can always pop off for a big game. 11 targets for 143 yards there. Diggs, had his ceiling game there. It's the one we've been begging for. So lots of good options here at the upper end. And, some of these guys I could see being contrarian again. AJ Brown really burned people who used him this week. But Dwayne McFarland actually had a really interesting stat about AJ Brown, because there was a lot of kind of concern that it was Marshawn Lattimore who had shut him down. But I'll read you this tweet from Dwayne here about AJ Brown. He was awarded 13 single man coverage looks by the Saints yesterday. He got open on 6 of those, 46%, but Ryan Tannehill only targeted him on 1 of them. He was also open on 63% of his routes of 10 yards or more. Dwayne goes on to say, bad box score day, but strong underlying performance. So I'm not giving up on AJ Brown. He's still a beast, and we might get an ownership discount here in a really nice matchup. We get Jamar Chase and T. Higgins back on the main slate. I mean, the T. Higgins explosion is coming. He's too cheap here at 5,400. Look at these targets, 15, 6, 8. Based on that workload, the big days are coming. Like I said, we mentioned with kind of a bounce back with Russ, I think DK Metcalf at 6,800, and man, Lockett is cheap here at 6,000 as well. DeVonta Smith is probably too pricey up here at 6,400. I know he had those 2 touchdowns, but the volume hasn't been great. They've been running the ball a ton. So DeVonta Smith is probably a fade for me up here at 6,400. DJ Moore, man, he continues to plummet. If you would have told me early on in the season we'd be getting DJ Moore at 5,900, I would have cried. And well, I guess early on in the season we did have him at 5,900. Let's just say at week 4, if you would have told me he would be back at 5,900, I would have been upset. But now we are here, and we get to decide if we want to buy the dip. the targets have still been solid. We'll see. We'll see. Maybe Cam takes over. Maybe he can get DJ Moore going, but still have a little bit of hope for DJ Moore in this offense. As far as some other cheap guys, I think we can mention Cole Beasley. He continues to be pretty involved in this offense, and at 4,800, kind of a buy the dip spot after he wasn't utilized too much against the Jets there in week 10. We'll have to see how Brandon Ayuk's role shakes out tonight. I think he could be interesting. Jamal Agnew didn't have a catch. He just had the one rush last week for 79 yards and a touchdown. So pretty abnormal, interesting stat line for him. Rashod Bateman looked really good on Thursday night. He kind of held off Sammy Watkins, and still had another 8-target game. So he's going to be in play here at 4,500. Let's see if we can find anything else interesting. Michael Gallup's price only comes up 200. He had 5 targets after the 9-week absence there. So in this high-scoring game, Michael Gallup is going to be very much in play, as will Mecole Hardman at 4,000. He only had 3 targets last night, but in that game where we're going to be trying to, attack it for points, I think Hardman will be in the conversation. MVS as well, his price only comes up $200. He only had a 2-target game, but he'll probably be popping in the air yards by low models this week. They did just miss on some deep connections. So MVS, always a cheap guy that's in the conversation there. But last week was extremely tough on DraftKings for finding these cheap wide receivers. It looked like we were maybe going to have Tyler Johnson, but then Chris Godwin played. So the cheap wide receivers, it's always a TBD situation. DraftKings has been doing a really good job sub 4,000 on these pricing. I guess I can mention Marcus Johnson. He had 100 yards receiving yesterday, which is pretty notable. And now they play Houston. So who knows? Maybe Marcus Johnson can be in the conversation. Let's head over to tight end here, where we have all the studs back on the slate. We didn't have any of these guys, Kelsey, Kittle, Waller, or Andrews, on the slate last week because they were all in island games or night games, and now they're all here. So Darren Waller, he's frustrating, man. He had a pretty poor performance again on Sunday Night Football. He has the 7 targets, but only 4 receptions for 24 yards. I'm guessing he is going to be the least popular of these tight end guys just because he's so boom bust. But that will be great for tournaments as well. So we can potentially go back to Waller in a nice matchup versus Cincinnati. TJ Hawkinson, another guy, 0 fantasy points in week 10 against Pittsburgh, 1 target. So disappointing. So I doubt many people are going to be rushing to click his button there. We do have a couple little injury situations to monitor at tight end. Dallas Goedert left the game yesterday with a concussion. Ricky Seals-Jones left the game with, I believe it was a hip injury. Yeah, hip injury. Sounds like he's day-to-day, but that's something to monitor. I think we'll have a couple of good cheap options again this week. Gerald Everett, who had been pretty quiet during that stretch without Russell Wilson, comes back and gets 8 targets. So anybody getting 8 targets at 3,100, that's definitely going to be in play. David Njoku's been fairly involved for the Browns, 4 targets, not a huge line, but again, we're dumpster diving here under 3,000, trying to see if anything else stands out. Not really right now, unless we were to get, Dallas Goedert missing, then maybe you get a little Jack Stoll in there. And that's what point we are at in the season. Myself touting Jack Stoll on the Mayo Media Network. Let's do a quick peek at defense as we wrap up here. Titans all the way up at 3,900, but normally we have a few teams over 4,000, so not as many, smash defensive plays by salary alone. Let's see. Anything interesting jumping out to me here? The Jags at home versus potentially Jimmy Garoppolo looks interesting. Let's see. We could have the Seahawks at home if Kyler Murray doesn't play again. You could have Seahawks at home versus Colt McCoy. That's going to look pretty good. Carolina versus Heine is always going to be in the conversation. Not seeing anything like really standing out from a cheap defense standpoint. Maybe a spot to pay up again. The Browns at home versus Cleveland at 3,100 looks pretty nice to me. And otherwise, we're on the expensive end. So we will have to wait and see how the week develops for defense, but as always, very good to run through the slate, get our bearings here as we get prepared for week 11. Once the salaries and the projections are out, or sorry, the salaries are already out. Once the projections are out, I highly recommend checking out Run the Sims. You can get 10% off any package with promo code Pete. You get 10,000 simulations for every showdown slate. For the main slate, you can use the custom lineups to enter into your contest. It even shows, how much they're projected for, how what the cumulative and product ownership is, so you can see which lineups are going to be popular or not. It really has been an awesome resource. So get over there, check out Run the Sims with promo code Pete, get you 10% off. You can find me on my YouTube channel at youtube.com/PeterOverzet. I review my GPP lineups every Monday morning, and then I do a strategy show every Friday afternoon where we get into the weeds with our DFS and GPP strategy. I appreciate you guys watching. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, like the videos, plenty more DFS and NFL sports betting content coming down the pipeline this week on the channel. We will see you guys next week for the Week 12 first look.